Hello and welcome everyone back to episode 29 of AI Ramblings, this time on a Saturday with my wonderful nephew, Neil Makwana, and myself. And just a programming note, typically we do the AI Rambling episodes, you may have noticed, a little bit earlier in the week. And we're trying a different scheduling programming change where we would do this on the weekend, particularly because Neil Makwana is now fully employed and working away hard during the week, and it makes a little bit more scheduling sense. So bear with us, but we'll continue to do the weekly thing, but it's going to be a couple of days delayed. The advantage of that is we get to absorb more of the events and news of the week, which just as usual keeps flooding away. And we thought we'd just kick it off with a bunch of things that caught our attention. And again, I just want to highlight that, there's dozens of things that are happening in AI and tech, and we just want to pick one or two, three that we think are the burning issues that are very notable for a bunch of reasons, and talk about that. So that's really the context what we are trying to do here at AI Ramblings. And I wanted to highlight, but in particular, Microsoft, Satya Nadella, the CEO. He did a couple of major podcasts with a bunch of notable people. We'll put up the links in the show notes as usual. Very worth watching, where he really went into the subtle, deep differences of Microsoft's evolving AI strategy post the redrawing of the iconic partnership between OpenAI and Microsoft, which started back in 2019. Microsoft invested over 13 billion, which on paper today is worth over $100 billion for them, and they have a 27% interest in the new for-profit part of OpenAI that is just getting papered right now. And they have access, as we've written extensively about, OpenAI's IP on not just their core models, but all of the applications for 7 years, all the way to 2032. And one thing that came up in the podcast was also that they also have access to OpenAI's custom chips that they're building. This is not to replace the chips that their OpenAI and Microsoft are using from NVIDIA, but additional, far more efficient chips that will roll out over the next few years. And Microsoft gets first dibs on the IP of that as well. And that was a little tidbit that was new. But there's a lot of subtlety in what he went through, which is worth talking about and reading about, etc. And most importantly, he really, without going anti-OpenAI per se, he really differentiates their positioning with AI infrastructure, with Azure and the cloud, and how a lot of the AI applications that are going to be built are going to be built optimized for the infrastructure. And so that is very different than what OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world are just doing on the software layer. It's a subtle thing, but it's a very important thing as investors try to get their heads around what all of this stuff looks like in the 2 or 3 years, way beyond chatbots. So that's the first news item I want to highlight quickly. And then the second one is there's ongoing talk about an AI bubble with the hundreds of billions, actually over trillions of dollars now being committed, way ahead of the revenues of these companies. And OpenAI with 14 billion, 20 billion now they've admitted in revenues that are underway this year, has commitments of over $1.5 trillion for AI infrastructure. And all of this is being financed off the balance sheets increasingly by the Metas and the Googles and the Microsofts of the world. Another issue that has come up, especially amongst smart investors, is looking at the depreciation schedules. Now, this gets into a little bit of the accounting weeds, but it's very important because one of the things people have done is compare the AI wave to previous big technology waves like the railroads and the telecom infrastructure for the internet, etc. And a subtle point there that has come up is, unlike those things where once you put the railroad lines, you can use them for decades, if not centuries. Telecom, same thing. AI infrastructure, the GPU chips, especially given NVIDIA basically ramping up their generations of chips every year, they depreciate much faster, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, which means that the financing, which is in the tens of billions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars, is dependent on the depreciation schedules. Why is that important? Is that if you need to the shorter the depreciation means the financing that is done on top of these data center investments using the chips as collateral, the chips theoretically are worth far less, far quicker. And so that is an issue that has come up. And there's a lot of pros and cons and debates going on. Some would say some of the weakness we've seen in NVIDIA and CoreWeave and others this week was part of this kerfuffle, this debate that's going on. And then the last news item I wanted to talk about with Neil here is Perplexity. Last week we talked about how Amazon put out a cease and desist letter against Perplexity in terms of their aggressive stance on how they're using their AI browser Comet to run agents on Amazon sites. And Amazon said, "Oh, you can't do that." And Perplexity is doing a lot of aggressive things like that on the content side, etc. And so they're being an AI bad boy, as it were, much like Uber was in its early days, etc. We see these in most tech waves, and it typically happens with new startups that are really trying to get ahead very quickly. And oftentimes, because they have far less resources than the bigger peers, they tend to be more aggressive, do things before they have permission, and then ask for permission or forgiveness later. And there's a little bit of that going on. And it's an important trend to highlight because Perplexity won't be the last. There'll be a lot more of these types of things. And then we have a major topic. So those are the three major news items that I wanted to kind of frame and talk about. And Neil, what do you think about some of the crazy
Yeah.
things that have gone on this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that stuck out to me the most, kind of carrying on our conversation from last week regarding Perplexity, I think they've taken up a unique position. You and I have talked about this on past shows and outside of the show and stuff like that. But I think this way that they're going about it, where you do first and you just ask for forgiveness later. I think that's really the only way that things are going to change. And we've discussed in the past this whole idea of the incumbents taking a while to react to this due to just their scale and how many people they impact with changes, and the fact that startups in this area are really the ones that are able to iterate fast and hard and take a lot more risk. And I think Perplexity has embodied that very well. Whether it's stuff with the cease and desist with Amazon, or just a lot of these new changes that they've been making to kind of, for lack of better words, like jerry rigs solutions together to get these things to work, I think is interesting. It's nice. It's fresh to see. But in the long run, we'll have to see. I mean, I don't know from a Perplexity point of view right now. I think we've discussed it a bit, but my exposure to it is mostly now through the Comet browser. I rarely go to perplexity.com because I use their browser, and how that product is shifting. It looks like Urban's really focusing hard on that. And it's a space I think will need to evolve fast, just because, as we've seen, I feel like everyone now has an AI browser of their own in some way. So how do you kind of differentiate yourself in that market is something I'm like particularly interested in seeing how Perplexity handles. And I'd wonder what type of risk they'd be willing to take in that space. But yeah,
No, a lot of things to kind of flesh out, and we're going to see this go on. And Perplexity, like I said, is not going to be the only aggressive entity here. We're seeing that behavior from the bigger companies as well. It's just that Perplexity is more noticeable, sharper, faster in some contexts. So I think it's an important issue to watch. So yeah, these are some of the core things that we are focused on, and then that brings us to our major topic discussion of the week, and it's on the topic of AI robots, which currently is getting a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm as the next wave of AI investments around the physical AI world. You've seen Tesla gain hundreds of billions of market cap value as Elon talks about his aspirations for his Optimus humanoid robots that he thinks he'll be able to sell millions of these things doing useful work in the office and home particularly. And I've been of the view that that's going to take a lot longer than not just what he says, but what the industry seems to think. And this was kind of underlined a little bit by a video that we're going to have in the show notes that Wall Street Journal senior tech columnist Joanna Stern did a very interesting 9-10 minute video, which I would recommend people watch on a startup that has a robot that is about half humanoid, looks humanoid, and it's teleoperated by a human, but it's designed to work in the home. It costs $20,000. Neil talked about it on one of our AI Rambling episodes not too long ago called Neo. And this was reviewed by Joanna with this hilarious video where the robot is trying to do things like open a dishwasher and almost stumbles down and falls and so on. And it just kind of illustrates how far away it is for this stuff to be really useful and how expensive they are. Not unlike most technology things, self-driving cars were like that 15, 20 years ago. And we're still at level 2 on self-driving cars, despite all the advancements with Waymo and Elon's robotaxis and Chinese things, which I also wrote about separately. So that is a major topic that I thought we'd have fun discussing. This is one that, Neil, you've been pretty close to. So what are your thoughts on that video and what where the stuff is?
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of the things recently that really took. I think there's a lot of virality in what's happening right now with AI and all these advancements, but this is one that really got people talking in a lot of interesting directions. Number one, just taking a step back because this is stuff I'm pretty interested in from the product side of things. They brought in a lot of really, really talented product people, whether it's actually designing the clothes of the robot, the robot itself, and also just the marketing campaign and the photo shoots that they had. They put a lot of time and effort in gathering the best talent possible. So it felt a little Apple esque in that way that they really intentionally walked through all of this and put the pieces together. Whether or not this will come to fruition, we'll see. But the initial reaction is, as you said, a bit mixed because of the fact that it's been advertised as this fully AI driven humanoid robot. And then it's made very clear through Joanna in the video and people online that this is fully teleoperated. MKBHD did a video on it too, where he kind of emphasized the same things. And it's also kind of the bane of the technology is that it requires so much training data that unless there is someone operating these things and simulating these motions and how they react, and the owner of the company even talks about to Joanna that we'd hope that the people who are going to adopt this early are people that are willing to let someone else be on the other end of the robot kind of viewing into their lives. It's just such an interesting
Yeah,
thing to hear
I'm
like
I'm eager.
verbalized
I'm
because
eager to give them $20,000 to have a robot with a teleoperating looking at everything I do in my personal life. No problem. Sorry, I
yeah,
had to jump
exactly.
in.
So yeah, so I mean it's weird. I think we're at this point right now with technology and at least as far as I've been aware of where there's like this really high barrier of entry to these early adoption things, whether it's things like Apple Vision Pro or now, much steeper barrier of entry with this Neo robot, but it's not anything different than what's existed in past years, but now it's just a little bit more invasive.
Well, let me ask you, your generation, would it be comfortable, given that you guys are much more comfortable theoretically with
Yeah.
technology, et cetera, cost issues aside, et cetera, having a robot basically in your house or apartment looking at everything you're doing with a teleoperator actually on the
I
other side?
think this just goes back to my generation's view on privacy versus other generations. I think people are very aware. There was this announcement that I saw someone saying that, like, with TikTok, for example, like most people know that TikTok is gathering a lot of data on you, but the algorithm is so good and people are getting so much value out of it for those 30 minutes a day where they're mindlessly scrolling. They really don't care what data they is collected.
And don't forget, Meta with Reels is doing it 3 times, 4 times more aggressively, making at
Exactly.
least 2x what TikTok makes in revenues. They
Exactly.
hit $10 billion on Reels a year before TikTok hit that number.
And that just shows that if people are willing to mindlessly scroll and not really get any value other than just kind of numbing their mind with this essentially just like brain rot with just the upside of being that they have a good time and it helps them get through their day at the sacrifice of their privacy. I mean, I really wouldn't be surprised if this is adopted a bit by people in my generation. But I think these like terms of service, as you will, have been like lowered a lot more, and that's also just the nature of the technology. With a lot of the stuff, as I said, there's so much training data involved. If they do a good job of educating people how that works, but I think it's the initial reaction for a lot of people. Like we're discussing this stuff from a technical point of view, but like I think it's important to also take a step back and realize that a lot of these people don't know how training data works, how any of this stuff works. So to mass public, there's obviously going to be like, and that's what I'm going to bring up in one of my reads of the week is how Hollywood's kind of affected people's perception of these technologies and how it's shaped how people think about it. But I think there's a lot of like learning curves and growing pains involved here, and we're just gonna have to see what happens.
Yeah, and I would stress this business of the data. It's very technical sounding. We did a AI rambling specifically on this, where with the head robotic AI research scientist at NVIDIA, Jim Fan, talked about the need for synthetic data and simulation stuff. He actually redefined the Turing test, which presumably we have passed with chatbots. This was a test in the '60s can these programs talk in a way that essentially convinces most humans that you're talking to a human? The Jim Fan's Turing test for robots in the home was a robot that would clean up the living room when they came back, and just kind of, everything looked spick and span, especially after a big party the night before. And then in Neo, and on most of these humanoid robot rollouts by these startups, the big application people seem to talk about is, oh, it'll fold your clothes. Oh, it will wash the dishes. You know what? I think the real tough test that they should pass, not cleaning up the room, not folding clothes, not washing dishes, is make the bed, okay? Especially a king size bed. Look, $20,000 for a robot, you can spend that easily in a year with human people coming in and, regularly cleaning up your home or apartment. And one of the toughest jobs they have in most homes is actually making the bed, not a bunk bed, but a real bed, perfectly. It's a long time before robots are going to be able to do that, given the customization, the unique aspects of that, for every home. And then the other thing is, unlike self-driving cars, where there are commonalities in roads and highways and so on, every home is different. And a robot needs to figure out how to operate in every home. So this stuff is going to take a long time, which is something, again, that really needs to sink in from a mainstream point of view, in terms of mainstream audiences and mainstream investors. And right now, there's a little bit too much of a drinking the Kool-Aid thing, that this stuff is just going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, which is why I wanted to talk about this as a main topic of the week. So thank you for a good discussion on this, which brings us to our read of the week. And you just kind of mentioned something
Yeah.
similar on this sense. Why don't you take it away on the read of the week?
Yeah, mine's a piece from the Wall Street Journal, essentially discussing how, I think everyone knows about Jarvis, which is the like Iron Man AI that's shown in the movies, that's able to kind of do anything and everything that Tony Stark wants. And it's a piece about how that technology has become analogous to how people explain AI in corporate America and how they kind of view it. And it's a piece more or less about the actual intricacies of the technology, more or less the influence that media and Hollywood has had on people's perceptions. Obviously, you have two polar ends of it. You can either have the Jarvis being able to help you essentially save the world as it does in the movies, or you have the opposite, which is, Terminator, which is Skynet coming to end the world. So it's a good piece that talks about that and everything in between. We've talked about the Jetsons, we've talked about the movie Her, but the piece just takes a good stab at trying to lay the land out as to how corporate America is thinking about it and how they're using these things interchangeably to kind of explain how they see this technology fitting into their workflows.
No, I think it's a great point, and it's something that I've been hammering for for several years now on my Substack daily Substack thing, which is that one of the principal risks, and here I have good company with Jensen Huang, and he hammers on this point every time. So does Mustafa Suleiman, who heads up the AI research at Microsoft, and that is, please, everybody, do not think these robots and these AIs are human. Do not anthropomorphize them. They are just tools right now. Yes, they can be more human-like, and they can be gussied up to sound human-like. That's, in fact, the chat GPTs, the OpenAIs of the world are spending gazillions of dollars to make this stuff, more human-like. OpenAI just released ChatGPT 5.1, which has a warmer tone and more agreeable personalities and all of that. It's all an act, and they're just computers. And that is the single thing I will just keep hammering away. And especially because we are all brainwashed, including the people who are creating these technologies, with science fiction, which is what the Times Up piece talks about. So please read that, but please do not get pilled by this humanization of AI. My read of the week is, again, kind of continuing the same discussion on the self-driving side. There was a very good article in the Wall Street Journal on the current state of China versus the US in self-driving cars. And that's something that we don't often talk about and look at, because we just focused on Google Waymo versus Elon's robotaxi. But it's a very vigorous scene in China. And this is important because China is much further along than the US in terms of the deployment of EVs, over 30% of the cars. And that's important also because China is the second largest auto market on the planet after the US. Obviously, they have a much bigger population, 1.4 billion versus 330 million here. But it's useful to read this piece to kind of get a sense of what's going on in China on both those fronts in the context of self-driving cars. They're still level 2, level 3, not level 5, which is, steering wheel, no worries about looking at what the car is doing. The car drives itself in all kinds of weather, all kinds of roads, rain, shine, snow, whatever. We're far away from that, years away. So it's an important article to kind of see what's going on the China side. So that would be another read of the week that I would highlight, which takes us to our obsessions of the week.
Yeah.
Neil, what is your obsession?
Yeah,
this week?
mine, it's less of an obsession. Maybe I'll rename mine for this week to Intrigue of the Week. It's something I haven't gotten to actually try out yet, but I've seen and eager to try out potentially, depending on how it's kind of rolled out and used. But it's ChatGPT adding the feature of group chats, and I saw a lot of discourse about this because people were essentially saying, "Why did Meta not figure this out and do this first?" You'd think because they have things like Instagram DMs, Facebook direct message, WhatsApp. Why did they not think from a social media aspect that this would be a natural fit? Why they didn't do it? I mean, we'll never know. They're focusing their efforts on other things, but ChatGPT has kind of beat them to this and has started rolling it out in a couple of select countries. I don't believe it's in the US yet, but it breaks down in this whole social engineering discussion that we've been having is how comfortable people are to let an AI into their group conversations, because it's one thing to have a one-on-one conversation with a chatbot as everyone has right now, and then it's a different thing to kind of let it pry in on the conversation and provide insight. And at that point, how different is that? It's just it's like a derivative of the whole neo robot dilemma that we're talking about, that instead of a person being there watching everything, you have an AI that's collecting data on your personal conversations with other people. Obviously, it's only there if you want it to be there. You have to intentionally set up this group chat and stuff. But the use cases are going to, I think, reveal themselves as they do with most of these things when people get to actually play with it in hand. But it's something that kind of surprised me when it came out. It seems like an almost obvious thing now that it's kind of been announced, but it's going to be cool to see how people find use out of it if they do.
No, I think you put up your finger on an important new trend on this. Look, group chats, most people don't realize it, but on Meta, on a lot of other social media, over half the activity is away from that common For You page that everyone doom scrolls on. It's really private group chats that people have with their friends and family and associates and so on. And this is a very important question, the business of privacy, trust, etc., where AIs are there recording everything. It's not always clear whether the stuff is going in to feed the models themselves from a training data point of view. So that is an important dynamic. On the other hand, we're used to increasingly now Zoom calls, every Zoom call, every video call we do, there's automatic recording of the calls by AI, summarization features, a lot of the stuff. So they're already in our Slacks and Zooms and so on and so forth. And so it's not a big stretch from there to, going into social media pieces, etc. So that's the kind of pro and con of it. And I dare say, given how we've kind of treated privacy in the social media era where we were all very comfortable becoming the product, as long as it's free or lower cost on the tiers, we're okay with it. And I dare say we'll probably give in to those trends in this and on this front as well, which is why the OpenAIs of the world are leaning aggressively into this, and they won't be the last, right? They'll be the first, but not the last. So I agree with that intrigue of the week. My obsession, as most of you know, I'm a longtime gamer for decades, and the gaming is, whether it's on PCs, Macs, handhelds, etc., is a core thing I look at. It's one of the biggest forms of media. Grand Theft Auto is GTA 5 is bigger than most movies, music, etc., put together in terms of multi-billion-dollar properties. GTA 6, I'm sorry to say, which was expected in May of next year, it got pushed up to later in the year. But my obsession was basically a very favorite company of mine called Steam Valve, which announced a number of hardware initiatives. An Xbox PS PlayStation size cube, 6-inch cube computer that runs or customized Linux operating system that basically does everything a Windows computer does and plays Windows game better than Windows. This is all kind of in the weeds, but very important given that Microsoft closed about a year ago a $70+ billion acquisition of Activision and for their Xbox franchise. And Xbox is you could say, is the last major consumer facing property at Microsoft. And things like Steam, with their innovation, they announced this Steam console. They also announced a very cool controller and VR glasses that can allow you to play Windows flat PC games. It's a little geeky, etc. I bring it up because from an AI's perspective, AIs are going to be very much a new factor on gaming. It could end up expanding gaming far bigger than a few 100 million people playing games all over the world to billions of people, particularly because one of the big things on gaming is they take a long time to play, especially the longer games, etc. And AI can increasingly real time help you, solve puzzles and do things through the game a lot quicker. So AI is going to be a big influencing factor on this. So it's an area that, at AI Rambling, we do watch very closely. This set of hardware, which by the way won't be available until early 2026. We don't know the pricing on this stuff. It'll probably be in the $500 to $1,000 area. It would, part of that is because of the tariffs right now. If the tariffs are lower next year, it'll probably be 20-30% maybe cheaper. We don't know. But it's an obsession that I wanted to highlight and underline. And it's an important thing to watch in terms of Microsoft, in terms of gaming, in terms of AI for the next year and a half to 2 years.
For sure. Wonderful.
So that brings us to our burning questions for each other. And my burning question, Neil, since you talked about the group text and so on, this was Neil, my nephew here. He just started a new position at a exciting Y Combinator backed fintech company, and so this was your first week on the job with
Yeah.
productivity apps and so on. So I was just curious, what do you think about office productivity in
Yeah.
companies in general from a data sample of one? What do you
Yeah, data
think?
sample of one week. It's a lot of Slack. I think that's the biggest learning curve. I've used things like Gmail and Google Calendar and Drive and all for ages. I've used Zoom on and off just due to the pandemic and school and stuff. But Slack is an area maybe I didn't have as much exposure to, and just to see that an entire company can be run essentially on Slack and how much integration there is on Slack with external tools in the form of Slack bots has been really cool. Yeah, Slack is great. I use it a bit in school, but it was just free versions. When you actually see that a company pays for the enterprise version and the amount of stuff it unlocks compared to the free one, you can really just run everything off of one app, which is really cool. So that's been the biggest, I guess, not learning curve, but maybe exposure to me this week is just Slack in general,
Very
and it's
cool.
definitely something that we're gonna have to maybe try out for ourselves for the show. Just like
No,
a
and
separate
and it's
Slack.
a great point because Sam Altman actually this week also we'll find a clip and put it up on the show notes. But he talked about Slack because he and other people at Facebook, I'm sorry, at OpenAI have talked about how their company essentially runs on Slack and messaging, and it's like the core thing that everyone uses. The 3,000 people there. But he went on to say that he would like to have OpenAI innovate with their chat GPT and GPT models to potentially augment Slack type of applications much more dramatically. And so he kind of hinted that he had aspirations that, the experience of Slack type of activity in a company could be truly morphed and changed and a lot more value added. Put a pin in that and space to
Yeah.
be seen. So, good answer to the burning question, and we'll watch that. So we can end with your burning question for me, my friend.
Yeah, Maya's once again a little on the nose for what we just talked about, but this whole idea of allowing AIs into group chats. I know we have our family group chat and we've been in plenty of group chats before. from your own view, is that something that you feel like you'd use or get value from, and would even feel comfortable in doing to some extent?
I think so. As long as, again, it's like I said, it's like, using AI and Zoom calls and getting comfortable. As long as it adds value, right? I mean, one of the things in any group meeting, personal, business, etc., people are always like asking questions. What should we do on XYZ project, etc. And in as much as there's live use of ChatGPT where people can jump in, or any kind of model, and it's giving suggestions, and no, I think that's terrific. And as long as, again, don't humanize it, don't treat it as another participant on the call. Think about it as a tool. And the design, the UI UX of the thing really makes clear that this is a tool for the use of all the humans on the group chat, whether it's a work group chat or a personal group chat. Yeah, I'd be fine with it, but those are my conditions, though. And
Yes, good,
again, do not humanize the AI is my
for
core
sure.
thing. So with that,
Good.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us again, as usual. Please, if you like this discussion, please give us a like and subscribe. It goes a long way to distribution of this podcast. And any suggestions, etc., please shoot us a line. And again, join us for episode 30 soon, and stay tuned.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.